Good evening, everybody. It's 5 p.m. We're going to give everybody else just a minute or two to log on, and then we'll get started with the People's Review Live tonight. Thank you all for being here, and thanks for registering. This is a great turnout. So excited to have this conversation. And I'm going to go ahead and get started. I don't want to waste any time. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the People's Review Live, hosted by the Equality State Policy Center. My name is Jenn Lowe. I'm Executive Director, and ESPC is a nonpartisan nonprofit organization that advocates for fair elections and transparent government for all of Wyoming. ESPC has been hosting the People's Review Live for 4 years now, with the goal of bringing together subject area experts to discuss pressing issues in Wyoming. Free of cost and highly accessible, PR Live falls right in line with ESPC's mission. PR Live is possible thanks to the generous support of our People's Review Live Leadership Circle members. If you'd like to know how to become a Leadership Circle member, please email info@equalitystate.org. As a reminder, this meeting is in a webinar format, so the panelists can see and hear each other. Although the panelists can't see you, we do encourage you to put your questions in the chat or in the Q&A anytime during this conversation. If you can't see or hear the panelists right now or are having any other tech issues, please let me or info@equalitystate.org know, and we'll do what we can to help you out. So, in honor of Indigenous Peoples Month, ESPC has asked an impressive panel of speakers to come together and discuss the issues most relevant to Wyoming's Native population. And I'm just so excited tonight to have this group. I'm going to give a brief introduction, and then I'm actually going to turn it over to them and have them really talk more about themselves and the work that they're doing. So first, I'm honored to introduce Andi LeBeau. Andi served in the Wyoming House of Representatives for 2 terms, representing the people of District 33. She currently serves as the Human Resource Officer for the Wind River Intertribal Council. She is extremely passionate about issues that impact her community and works diligently to bring much needed resources to the Wind River Reservation population. Hi, Andi. Lloyd Goggles. Lloyd currently serves as the chairman for the Northern Arapaho Business Council. Lloyd works hard to ensure that those facing the most challenging issues in his community, including substance abuse and homelessness, are seen and heard. The 6-person Northern Arapaho Business Council oversees day-to-day operations for the tribe. Hey, Lloyd. And April Fournier. April is a member of the Navajo Nation, and she's the National Program Manager for the Advanced Native Political Leadership. She supports the development and delivery of the Native Leadership Institute Leadership Training Program and Native Data Fellowship. April currently serves on the Portland, Maine City Council and lives an adventure-filled life with her husband, 4 kiddos, and 2 dogs. Welcome, April. Thank you all for being here tonight. As a reminder, I'm going to turn that Q&A on. I'm sorry it's not on, but you may submit questions through the chat or Q&A, or you can text me if you have my number. So I'm just going to actually turn it over to each of you in the order that I introduced you to go ahead and talk about yourself a little bit and the work that you're doing, and we can start the conversation from there. So Andi, if you want to kick this off.
Sure, thanks, Jen. And thanks, Equality State Policy Center. I'm honored to be here. First, I'm going to apologize. I have 5 grandbabies with me and 1 cat, so I apologize for the noise in the background, but that's the life of me. I'm just passionate about getting involved, getting to the ballot box, making our voice heard, and educating the Indigenous people here in District 33, but all throughout Wyoming, anywhere throughout the United States, that their voice matters. And in order to make change and affect change, you got to make your voice heard by voting. And so that's so important. And I just passionate about a lot of issues. I mean, there's so many issues to help people, and you know, I'm willing to help campaigns. I'm willing to help people get past the finish line, and to do that kind of work that's important for Indigenous representation, is particularly at the state level here in Wyoming. So thanks.
Thank you, Andi, and thank you for your service to the state of Wyoming. Lloyd, do you want to maybe introduce yourself and talk a bit more about what you do?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Lloyd Goggles. I'm the current chairman for the Northern Arapaho Business Council. I'm a former U.S. Marine. former Wyoming guardsman, former law enforcement on BI side, tribal, and on the municipal side. I have, and former game warden, so I have a little bit of, and a SORNA officer. So I have a lot of experience in different things and views from, from all of the, I would say orbit, I guess, I have an orbital view of things, but now it's a little bit more intimate because I bring that to light here, as the chairman, and there's there's a lot that I've taken in through the years that I believe can help foster a better understanding between the federal agencies, the state agencies, as well as our tribal counterparts. Thank you.
Thank you, Lloyd, and thank you for being here. I appreciate your time. I know each of you is just so busy with everything on your plates. And April, we invited you here as someone that's not really familiar with everything Wyoming, and sometimes that outside perspective can really add a lot to the conversation. So if you don't mind introducing yourself, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me tonight. It's so good to see Andi again. It's lovely to also see your little grandbaby there. I think that's just one of the most beautiful things about our community is we're often very multi-generational in a lot of spaces. So thank you again. I'm April Fournier, and as we mentioned, I'm a member of the Navajo Nation, or Dene as we call ourselves, but I actually live in Portland, Maine, all the way on the other side of the country, where I serve as a at-large city councilor. I just was reelected to my second term. And so I was actually the first Native person to be elected to the council here in Portland, which is the largest city in Maine. And so the fact that it took until 2020 for that to happen is, I think, really a story that we see happening all across the country, from local all the way up to federal offices. And so what we know is we're also about 3% of the population, but less than 0.5% represented in public office. And so in order to reach that equal representation or representational parity, we would need about 17,000 elected officials, and we're actually just over 300. So there's a very big representational gap in having our voices at so many of these tables in which the decisions are made that directly affect our communities. And so I'm so excited to work for Advanced Native Political Leadership, where we're working to close that gap. And that's through community engagement, that's through our leadership training, but really taking a whole ecosystem approach to how do we help our communities increase their voices, increase the power, so that we're able to really be influencers in all the decisions that are made for our communities. And so not only do I get to do this as someone who's serving in public office as well, but I get the really great privilege to work in so many different communities doing this training and learning, how do you create that path towards public office? But not only how do you create that path, but how do we do it in an authentic way where we get to still be ourselves? We don't have to change who we are to serve in these spaces, but we really get to speak from our voice, which is the voice of our community and the voice of those that came before us, that taught us everything that we know. So I'm really excited to have this conversation. I'm so excited to hear more from those that are living in Wyoming and your experiences, but really just here to help offer any insights that I can. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here. And following up on that, one of the first questions that I would like to ask is, can you frame this in a bit of historical context? How can a better understanding of historical context contribute to a more nuanced discussion about citizen engagement in Indigenous communities? And I think you sort of touched on that, but I'd love for you to expand on it, April, before we move on.
Yeah, for sure. I think, for so long when we think about our schools, our civic engagement, our political participation, and even just visibility, it's been a really one-sided conversation that was not inclusive of our voices in our community. So to really begin any sort of work, I think you really have to have an understanding of why things are the way they are, and start from that education and awareness that we are contemporary. We are very different communities from nation to nation, and we all hold very different identities based on our different lived experiences. So we're not a monolith. And I think that's one thing that we frequently encounter as we're, working outside of our communities is we're not all the same. We're all very, very different, and we have very different experiences. And so to be able to be inclusive, to draw the communities into a lot of the conversations, that's the first part to really creating relationships. You have to also be able to build trust, repair a lot of the damage that's been done historically. So in order to understand, why your community might have lower Native participation and civic engagement, you really need to understand the history of the Native nations in your area. And so I think a lot of it comes back to, again, conversation, engagement, being able to be sure that our voices are at the table as these conversations are happening, but we're also very, very different, and understanding that the history that's been told to so much of our country so far has been very one-sided. So being able to create more education and awareness around what are both sides to that story, and then how do we retell this for the next generations after us.
That's very, very helpful, April. Thank you. Lloyd, do you think you can comment on more specific historical context as it relates to Wyoming, and sort of the issues maybe that we face that are unique?
Yes, thank you. And I agree with the other lady. I'm sorry, but yes, amidst my travels in different places, overseas and here, we're always recognized by, just by, having the, the Uber, the Uber travels and everything else in between. We're always recognized as the first people, or I'm always informed that they're educated about the people here. And I don't, I thought about this, the question earlier too, and I think a lot of that begins with stronger diplomacy. Because a lot of it, can be misread by because there's tribe people who have a more militant take on things, but I think that kind of veers the rest of us away from things like that, because depending on experiences and whatnot, I believe that's the base of where things are spoken of and addressed. And when they're addressed in a diplomatic way, there's a better understanding that it fosters peace, depending on that person of where it comes from, who's in the room. And I believe in with the things that happen to all of the tribes in the United States, that needs to be understood as well. But also, we have to veer away from the victimization part of things, because that can be kept alive for thousands and thousands of years, and we won't get nowhere, and neither will our future generations. So to have it addressed, acknowledged, and ultimately show and practice forgiveness, that's where things like that are alleviated, I believe. And so in this seat, I've been able to, I believe, address those at little parts here and there in different forums, whether it's on the state level, the federal level, or even amongst tribes. And it seems to have a good feedback amongst people. It's really, on my take, that's just my take from my understanding, from my teachers, from my grandparents, and then my mentors who are, from all races. I have a strong understanding of culture. That's always been an understanding that I've had since I was a teenager, or like even a child, from my grandfather to going overseas for the first time to play football. We were taught to be, that we had to be aware, that we were going into a different culture. and then going into the military about being sensitive to things. And so I think in that sense, it could be reverted back to us and all people in the United States, because, we are a land of cultures, and, whether one acknowledges it or not, we still are, because we come from somewhere. And so, thank you.
That was great. Thank you very much. And you segued really well into the next question that I wanted to ask. So, Andi, I'm going to direct this question at you. But, cultural sensitivity is something that I'm sure you were very aware of during your time in the legislature. So in what ways can citizen engagement initiatives be designed to respect and incorporate the cultural values and traditions of Indigenous communities?
Thank you for that question. First and foremost is we're a sovereign nation. There's two distinct sovereign nations here on the Wind River Reservation. So we have that distinct political status that other people just don't have. And so that's important to know too. And it goes back just to the historical, the question before this too. And so it's important to know the historical context and to understand it and respect it, because sovereignty, we're fighting for sovereignty every day. I've seen it chipped at. People come with an intent to try to help us, right? With whatever issue it may be, education, a lot of mental health issues, law enforcement issues here. But, we have our tribal court. We have our own law and order code. We have traffic laws. So I've always pushed back on ideas that maybe the state thinks is good for us, but I just say, you know what? Let's enforce our own Shoshone and Arapaho law and order code. We don't need the state. And I just seen that one too many times where we have to waive our sovereignty a lot, too many times. And we're in a system where my grandparents probably weren't welcomed, and they were probably intimidated, harassed, or threatened to go vote back in the early 1930s when they were able to vote. And I remember driving to Lander with my grandparents, and they would, go down Main Street, and we'd look at the storefronts, and they say, "Granddaughter, that store right there, 10 years ago, we couldn't really go in there. We weren't welcomed. They still had a sign, no dogs or Indians allowed." So that generation, just the generation, my grandparents' generation, and then my parents have to live that way. We're working with systems that were not designed for our participation as Indigenous people, nor our protection. So first we fight for the protection and to be included in laws, but also at the same time, some of these laws are not good for us. We have our own laws. And so it's that balance of what's good. And then with people on the outside, listen with the intent to understand, not to come in thinking that you have all the answers.
That's very, very helpful. And I appreciate you, kind of reminding us that history doesn't mean necessarily 100 years ago, 200 years ago, right? Like history is very recent when it comes to a lot of these issues. Would either the other two of you like to jump in on sort of the cultural sensitivity when it comes to civic engagement and working with Indigenous communities? In another way, I'll ask that question, or, what are some of the common challenges that these populations face when it comes to being civically engaged and participating in the process, whether it's in your sovereign government, state government, or any other? And April, do you want to try that question?
I think I saw that Lloyd wanted to go, so I'm happy to cede to him and then go afterwards.
Thank you, April. With here, just from, my involvement, like in the community, it's all, there's and I've had it mentioned to me by non-enrolled members too, of their families' historical beliefs of how the Indigenous people are. And so, but with their interactions and, with the people here, they've always, come to respect the Indigenous the cultures. That is, it's viewed or skewed in a sense by our other members as well, because they and there's all these variables that get in the way with how because some they have the small mind of that, well, you've seen them all, but that's not necessarily the case. And so it's just a little by little, I believe that progress is being made on the front as a whole by just even like the people that we have in this room, and say in a big city, like from, she's making a big impact about who her people are and then who our people are and everyone else, through like how with who they meet, who they communicate with, and how things are done, and that's it's not big progress, but it's progress regardless. And that's I would like to think that it's being made every day, and little by little, those barriers of misunderstanding are being broken as well too. So that's just a little tidbit I'd like to add to that. So thank you.
I like that, barriers of misunderstanding. That's great. April, I'd love to kind of hear you kind of piggyback on that question on some of the more common challenges that we come across when doing this work in these communities.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I always come back to is this really has to be an investment. So it can't just be just a kind of a snapshot in time, or, just coming out to engage with Indigenous communities when it's Indigenous Peoples Day, or when it's Native American Heritage Month, or when it's Missing and Murdered Indigenous Peoples Day. We are Indigenous year-round. And so making sure that if you're really looking to create citizen engagement opportunities, or really trying to incorporate our cultural traditions and values into the work that happens every day, that engagement really needs to happen every day. And so this is, in every opportunity that organizations or elected bodies have to think about, for all the decisions that are being made or for all the initiatives that are happening, what voices aren't at the table. So if you want to, include our values and traditions, do you have someone from that community sitting in the room as you're making the decisions? And so when we don't have a chance, and I think Andi talked about this as well, when decisions are being made for our communities, they're often not the right decision, because we know best about how to serve our people, about how to enforce our laws, about how to spend the money and the resources to help our community members. So really making sure that this is not just cultural appreciation or recognizing cultural importance on those big days, that everyone is aware of. This is making it an everyday practice and part of every lens that you're looking through, and part of every conversation that you're having, is that really our voices are being included on a regular basis. Our perspectives are being included on a regular basis. Our cultural traditions and values are being included on a regular basis. So it becomes an everyday regular thing rather than just a couple of times a year. We're really making those outreaches for connection or bringing our voices into the room. We really need to make it a more regular practice.
I appreciate that. And I appreciate the reminder. I think that's something that we can all sort of work on doing a better job at when it comes to, inclusivity and sort of thinking about these issues. Andi, I'd like to jump a couple questions and move to the youth question. I know that this is something that is important to you, but what strategies can be implemented to actively involve and empower the younger generation in decision-making processes within these communities and civic engagement specifically?
My experiences is using the technology, and particularly the technology that they communicate from and within. I think we got to take that leap and bounds, and by no means did I figure that out or nail it on the head. I didn't, but it's getting to where they're at in the communication technology that they use via communication to get that kind of information. I have 2 kids that are Gen Zs and 2 millennials, 4 kids. And so it's really to look at the generational differences, they're huge. They really are. And then from me to both of those generations and how to interact, with them, it can be a challenge sometimes. And with youth, it's just really important. I know MMIP, we had a great movement with the MMIP issue. It's still there with our young people. That's an important investment. I think with my experience too, not all of our people want to go to the traditional educational setting. They want career and technical. They want to get right out and they start families early here. So they want to get out and have jobs and put food on the table and heat and cool their homes and have transportation to and from work and, and go and have fun with their family and do things. And so I think that was a big important issues I saw was important. And then just to segue with all the stuff we talked about, there's one important point I wanted to mention is that, again, we have two sovereign nations. And so as a state rep, you may have an issue where one tribe supports it and the other doesn't. I have issues, where some youth support it and other youth don't. But particularly when it comes to two sovereign tribes and it's one issue, and I have one, I'm going in and I'm asking my leaders, how do you support this? One tribe could say yes, the other tribe will say no. And so it's important when organizations in our state of Wyoming push those kinds of issues is make sure you do your due diligence and you talk to both sovereign nations. And there was a lot of times that I had to take the vote, right? Like I had to make the best decision, even though I knew the two sovereign nations, one supported it and one didn't, then I had to own up and do my best educated guess, gather the best information for why I was going to vote the way I did. And so that's important in all these issues too. And it's okay to respect that. And then the other thing is there was a lot of issues that came up from my perspective that I really pushed, and being unapologetic about being Indigenous, that even sometimes it didn't fit in the D category, or it didn't fit with the R. Is like, it's a tribal thing, it's an Indigenous thing. And sometimes I may not go with the Democrats. Maybe I'm going to go with the Republicans because I think that fits better from this Indigenous perspective. And so I know I threw my Democratic caucus for a loop, but that's important too for civic engagement, is two sovereign tribes, knowing that they may not agree on every issue across the board.
Yeah, I always think that's very interesting as it relates to Wyoming, and I'm not sure if that's the case in other regions, but I do think that that is probably a very significant challenge for folks trying to do work either in the state legislature or even as organizers. So, April, can you share any sort of experiences that kind of relate to what we're talking about that from other areas?
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the things, so when we're a nonpartisan organization. And so as we're recruiting members, what we also know about, two major political parties is they aren't always in alignment. As Andi said, they're not always in alignment with tribal values or the things that we want for our own sovereign nations. And so one of the ways as we're interviewing people and deciding, what type of leaders do we want to see going into these spaces to represent our communities, we often are looking more at values alignment rather than specific, like, are you a D, are you an R? It's like, are you representing our Indigenous values as we would want to see them as leaders? And so what we do find, something that works in Oklahoma might not work in Montana, or something that works in North Carolina might not work in California. And so really, again, understanding that we are not a monolith. Every community is going to be so very different. But when we articulate and really lean into what are our values as Indigenous leaders, as Indigenous communities, that really is going to drive those policy decisions. That's going to drive how we engage with these elected leaders or these different bodies that are making decisions. And like Andi mentioned, sometimes you're going to vote with one body and sometimes you're going to vote with another, depending on how is that going to directly affect your community. And so I think that's the lens that we take our work through. And as we're training the next generation of leaders who are going to go into school boards and city councils and state legislatures, that's the lens that we're also challenging them to look through is first, consider your values and the values of your community, and then let that guide your decision making.
Thank you for that insight. Lloyd, I kind of want to ask you this next question. You know, it seems like in your professional experience, you've worked at different levels of government and different agencies. So I think that you might have a good answer to, you know, how can partnerships with local, regional, and national governments enhance citizen engagement in these communities without compromising your autonomy?
Thank you. That's a good question. That was one of the ones that I had to start beside because I just liked it. I mean, like I mentioned before, I think that all starts with a sense of diplomacy. I'll repeat that, and then because that kind of well, there's some rough waters that have to be navigated amidst different forms. Whether wherever you're at, just like for instance, I've had meetings with with the Riverton mayor, and that was at that was at his request, and I didn't really know what he wanted to talk about, but a lot of the issues that were that were in that discussion was something that I was already familiar with, and so that really helped. Because we were able to draw a parallel, then kind of get to where at the end of the meeting we were both on the same pages that we wanted to help our neighbors. That's how I view like everyone in the community as well as the world, is that like everyone's my neighbor, and that's what I practice. And so along with that too is being able to ask the right questions, share your concerns, and at least with that being said, there's always a middle ground to be gained, and that's where I think a lot of that lies. And then again, it also helps people to understand, because there's always more than one person in those meetings sometimes, and they're always, when they're fresh and you're fresh, it makes everyone a bit more curious, and so that's what I like. Because going back to what Andi said, what's helped me more than anything is being able to listen first. That was a lesson that my grandpa taught me. And that's, and so, and then when it comes to the civic engagement, I believe that, those big engagements, they have a trickle down effect, because, we inform who's around us. And we let them know that some groundwork's been laid, and so that kind of eases them, and it helps to like maybe foster their curiosity a bit more, and you might even know those people, and so that kind of helps to strengthen your cause, your your ground that you stand on. And so that's that's the value that I see with that level of involvement.
Thank you very much. So, kind of piggybacking on that, this is not something specific that I had in the notes that I shared with you, but one thing that keeps me up right now is sort of this chipping away at the Voting Rights Act that we're seeing across the country, making it harder for marginalized communities to actively participate in the voting process. Is this something that concerns any of you as it relates to the voices being heard through votes?
you know, just from being aware of it these last few years, because it's really hit hard here. And then in a small difference I could make to where the identification part. I mean, because there were some of the polls, like in the surrounding communities, and well, actually even here, there was a struggle whether or not they were going to take the tribal IDs. Some people didn't have, like a state ID or driver's license or whatever, but still they were registered. They're a U.S. Citizen as well as being a tribal citizen, and so that was so there was a bit of a blow up, and there was some understanding, and I don't know. I wouldn't be able to elaborate on the present day status of that, but still I was aware of it then, and there were some people from within the tribal community who they still made it a point amidst themselves to go and put their votes in where they needed it, so that's it was just kind of hit and miss between who wanted to be heard, like Andi said, and who wanted, but others, they, just got, they were discouraged and angry and, like a little frustrated. But so I try to help, different ones to tell them, well, I'll help you find a way to get, your vote heard or your voice heard, so.
Thanks, Jen, for that. I'll piggyback on Chairman Goggles' response. It's very alarming. Since I've served in the legislature, my experience, what I've saw and heard, was always trying to chip away at that. I was able to successfully sit on the corporation's elections political subdivision, and so they recognize our tribal ID. And I have a good relationship with our current Secretary of State, Chuck Gray. I do, and so I just told him, when you become Secretary of State, please. I educated with him. I sat down with him one-on-one. I had a one-on-one with him saying, to get our tribal ID, it is the criteria to get a tribal ID. We have to have a state certified birth certificate. We have to have acknowledgement from the Federal Bureau of Indian Affairs that I'm 11/16 Arapaho. And then I have to have my Social Security card, a federal Social Security card, to get my ID. So it's the most vetted ID, and it's more vetted than the state ID or driver's license here in Wyoming. So he understands that, and I just say, please leave our ID alone. If you do it, I will be coming to visit you and lobby you, and I know the process now, and I'll have it. But I think the chipping away at rights, chipping away at marginalized communities of which I come from, me and my people, I'll take it as a blessing. There's a silver linings to that, because our people get fired up when we're mad. We get angry. And I think I knew my role is, I know a lot of my colleagues and Indigenous family and friends, they get tired. They're like, non-Indigenous people come, that's just like, you need to learn. This is on you. You become informed. I don't have the time to educate you. But I know in my role, the Creator really taught me, that's my role, is to educate. I have the wherewithal, I have the patience, and I have the heart that I will sit with you, Governor, Secretary of State, across the aisle, my Republican colleagues, and we can have a discussion. I will educate you. I have the patience to do that. And it's not to say that those that don't, I get it and I understand, and they don't have time. But I know my role is to take the time with people. And so I think it fires us up. I know it's going to fire me up, and I know I'm going to get out the vote and get people engaged, particularly our communities.
I think this is a good conversation. So April, I'd like you to also kind of chime in. What are you seeing in other places that impact voting rights specifically for marginalized communities?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really interesting and why, you hear the phrase representation matters, and I think at some points people are like, okay, we get it, but really truly it's so important. So here in Portland, We have different like city council committees, you know, that we're assigned to, like there's finance and there's housing and economic development, but there's also the legislative committee at the city level. And so what we have is we have our lobbyists that are hired by the city that go to the state to keep an eye on whatever state policies are coming up that might affect our city. And for me, when I was elected, that was the first committee I wanted to be on, because having watched what's happened with tribal sovereignty fights here in Maine, but as well as access to voting, we have, you know, our southern part of the state is actually pretty liberal in their policies and really recognizes, you know, lots of different identities and wants to support and protect those rights. The northern half of our state is a little bit different. And so often what we see from a lot of the legislators that are in the second congressional district are sponsoring voter identification bills and, you know, limitations to the polls, having people that are able to open carry at the polls, or things that might intimidate election clerks, or reduce access to like drop off ballot boxes. And so I think one of the key ways in which we're able to really create protections or ensure that the protections aren't chipped away is making sure that we are present in all of the spaces where these decisions are being made. And so often we think of a lot of the voting rights things are just, you know, state policies. And so it's a lot of the state legislators that are doing that work, and they are doing such incredible work, and our secretaries of state. But it also comes back down to our school boards and our city councils that are viewing these and can go and provide testimony, whether it's in writing or in person. They can drum up that energy, like Andi mentioned, you know, with our communities, and say, hey, did you know that this was happening? Because each legislative session, I think there's something like here in Maine, I think there's something like 3,000 bills that get, you know, written, and they get titles and they have to work through committee. So what, like, everyday citizen is going to be able to keep track of 3,000 bills? Not many. Some people do, and they're very vocal about it, but not many. So if you really need to have someone who is in a position like myself, who's on, you know, a city council, that is able to kind of filter through all that information and say, hey, community, we have 3 bills actually that have some momentum that are going to affect your voting rights, or that are going to affect your access to ballot boxes, or that are going to further restrict our, you know, community members from being able to get there. And so I think having that representation in so many different spaces and recognizing the importance of that presence and those voices, and then how we use that, you know, it's not just, okay, I attended this committee meeting and great, now I know what's going on. It's, for me, it falls on my shoulders. It's my responsibility, similar to what Andi said. This is the position I can hold. And, you know, some other people really don't have, you know, for whatever reason, the ability to then educate others. That's the role that I've chosen to take as, you know, an elected leader with this identity. Is it is my job to be able to communicate back to my community. You need to pay attention. This is going to affect you, and this is what I need you to do. I need you to show up, and I need you to tell our legislators and tell our Secretary of State and tell our governor that this is going to harm our communities, and this is how. Because often I think if you're not from a community and you don't hold that identity, you might not recognize how harmful something's going to be as well. So again, representation, having a voice in all these different spaces so that you can sound the alarm bells when these things are coming up, is really how we hold on to the rights that we have.
So with groups like ESPC and others that are doing civic engagement, you know, what I'm hearing from all 3 of you is, first, listen. How do we do that? And then second, you know, I think this kind of piggybacks on the next question, like, in what ways can traditional knowledge be integrated into the citizen engagement processes? And, you know, how can we contribute to more sustainable and culturally informed decision-making? I know listening, but it sounds to me like I'm not sure how I can best listen, which formats, which information I can take. And also I find that, you know, all 3 of you are in this position where you also have to listen to what your communities want, right? So you're sort of, you 3 in the positions that you are, seem kind of like communication hubs. So yeah, back to the knowledge sharing, and also, you know, helping me understand how I can be the best listener.
Well, I think after, the pandemic for me shook up, Mother Earth shook and showed us how strong she is with this virus that came through us a few years back. And then it changed a lot of things that probably wouldn't have changed processes. One is the technology that people in the state of Wyoming, they kind of want to know kind of what the issues are, is you can get on the website and you can see a select committee on tribal relations and see the issues they're working, discussing. And they always have our tribal leaders there to make statements, and all of our tribal representatives of who it may affect, our superintendents of our school districts, our DFS director workers, whoever's in the trenches working, being able to testify. So that's one way. The education committee is another important one. And they can get on these committees and look, and then they can also get on the Equality State Policy Center and listen to this discussion in this space that we're having right now. But the big thing is, just like with teachers here locally, is like, if you really want to know and be invested, if you really want to make an impact, if you really want to have that mutual respect and purpose and meaning for what you want to do, like particularly a teacher, come to our community events. Let the kids see you, let the grandmas see you, let the grandpas see you, the aunties, the uncles, the moms, the dads, the little kids say, oh, my teacher came. Those little things go a long way. They make a huge impact. And organizations like you, Jen, you call me up, I'm coming through Lander, let's have a cup of coffee. That's what you do. Simple things like that.
Thanks, Andi. That is helpful. And I would love for the two of you, Lloyd, Chairman Goggles, and April, to also jump in and answer the question if you'd like.
Yeah, I think one of the things I would share is so much of what we do, and I think just by the way that our communities operate, we're relational in nature. And so everything is done through food and conversation and coming together as communities. And so much I think of the work that happens because we're gathering and because we're really intentionally building these relationships. And they're not transactional relationships. It's not, I'm reaching out to you because I want something. It's, I'm reaching out to you because I want to know you, because I want to know how I can show up for you and how I can help you. And so I think making sure that when you are doing outreach, or when you're trying to make connections to different communities, it's not because it's, oh my gosh, we're in crisis and we need to know this answer like tomorrow, or I have a question that I need to get back to somebody about. But it's really truly about, let's build a relationship first before we start to have, these asks of each other, and really trying to make sure that they're authentic relationships. Because I think that's the other thing that, many members of our communities can spot, is when something is transactional in nature, or when it's one-sided, or when it's just, you're trying to extract something from me, but you're not giving anything back to our community. So I think really being intentional about, when I'm doing this outreach, I'm doing it because I want to get to know you and your community, so that I can serve you better in whatever capacity I'm in, whether it's an elected official, whether it's, the executive director of an organization, or if it's a community organizer. It's really with the lens of, again, listening to understand. I want to build a relationship so I can show up for you, and really not trying to be, extractive. We're used to extractive. So we really want those deep, committed relationships.
Yeah, I'd love to also hear your thoughts, Chairman Goggles. I think that, specifically in your role with the Business Council, you might have a slightly different perspective.
Okay, yeah. Well, what worked for me in an example was upon speaking to the House floor and to the Senate floor, I just reminded them of once again, like all of the cultures like in the country. And I went in a little deeper that, we have two beautiful cultures, indigenous cultures here in Wyoming. And I invited them. I invited them all to to come and visit, come and see a powwow or you know, come and visit us, you know, just, you know, stop and visit, you know, like at the, you know, at the chambers, or, you know, just even if you're running through, come say hi. You know, because I wanted them to see, you know, see our men, women, and children, and, you know, the things that we have here. And you know, that, you know, and then right as I was exiting, you know, I got a lot of good feedback, you know, like amidst all the handshaking and stuff, you know, that, I mean, there was open, you know, they would say, yeah, you know, like I'll be by, I'll let you know, here's my card, and, you know, I'll be by to visit, you know. And I don't think anyone's ever really extended, you know, that vacation home for me, you know, to as large, you know, I mean, to those large rooms like that. And, you know, that was just the way that I thought, because, you know, it was just to pique their curiosity a bit more, because, you know, like I love Wyoming, you know, it's a beautiful state. I love the fact that I am from Wyoming, and, you know, that was one thing that I repeated there, is because it's, and, you know, like I love her people, you know, because you know, like I got friends, you know, throughout the state and beyond, and, you know, like I want to show them, you know, that I am a part of Wyoming. You know, this is my home, and, you know, like you know, like you got to be proud of your home, and so that's what I really wanted to impress and maybe impose on them a little bit more, that, you know, this is right in the middle of it, and, you know, whether you're going north, south, east, or west, you know, sometimes. So, thank you.
No, that's a great point. And, you know, finding common ground, I think is probably a great way to catch some of the attention of those lawmakers. So we have a couple of audience questions. We're getting close to 6 o'clock, and I like to make sure we stop prompt at 6 so we can all get some dinner and spend some time with our families. So the first question is for Chairman Goggles, and I'm hoping that it's okay, I'm not sure, but perhaps a little bit off topic, but thinking of the Sand Creek anniversary, perhaps Lloyd would know, was the Sand Creek Run held this year? I don't know what that is.
As far as I know, I don't think it was. I know that was it was kind of been a topsy-turvy within the I mean, within the tribal elements, who's gonna honor it with the day off, who isn't. The tribe, you know, we went through, you know, like a business as usual. The casino employees, you know, they had the day off to you know, to honor it. But I think overall it was honored in remembrance, but I don't think the run happened.
Well, thank you, and sorry for throwing that one at you. And so I think that we actually have another really good question from the audience. So I'm gonna give you the question, and then I will give you a minute to think about it while I kind of update the audience on some ESPC events coming up, and then I'll give you each a couple of minutes to kind of respond to this answer. So give you a few seconds to think about it. If you could share one thing that you wish every Wyomingite interested in supporting Native American communities could hear, what would it be? So again, if you could just wave your magic wand and have every Wyomingite understand how we can better support Native American communities, what would it be? So I'll give you a quick minute to think about that, and I will come back to our program. Just want to let everybody know that ESPC is a 501c3 nonprofit, and we are able to host programs like these and our candidate training and our advocate training from your donations. If you have any interest in helping us with our end of year donations, please visit equalitystate.org. No amount is too small, and we appreciate every bit. This Saturday in Rock Springs, ESPC will be hosting a fun-filled free community event. Join us on Saturdays. We play loteria and win some fun prizes. For information on that event in Rock Springs, you can email Rosa at equalitystate.org for more information. And then in January, in January, we'll be hosting our next Tax Facts Lunch and Learn, where we will be hosting former Governor Dave Friedenthal and Senator Cale Case to talk all things taxes going into a budget session. We will not be hosting any virtual programming in December, as we will be giving you all the month off to spend time with family and friends. So with that, I'm going to come back to you. I hope that was enough time. Okay, any volunteers? Or are you guys going to make me pick?
I'm the only one not from Wyoming. So what I would offer to Wyomingites and really to anyone tuning in is there are so many incredible state-based organizations that are doing really important voter engagement work, civic participation work, and so many Native organizations that are really starting to find their footing, both on a national level and at the state level. And so I think one of the things I would encourage is really just doing some research and seeing, one, whose land are you occupying if you are not from a Native community? So getting to know who are the tribes in your area, what businesses, are they involved in? How can you best engage with their communities so that you really understand how are you able to support your local communities? But even then looking at the state level, at the national level, what are some of the other tribal organizations doing really important work from a policy level, from voter engagement, from training our next civic leaders, and really thinking, how can you educate yourself on supporting them, directing more people that in your circles to be able to expand this knowledge. I think one of the most important pieces that we can do is education, awareness, and visibility, and really making sure that we're part of every conversation on a regular basis. And so if you're at a table where decisions are being made, look around and just make sure, our voice is being represented. And do you have an opportunity to maybe raise a hand or raise a question and say, hey, I think we have a perspective that's missing, and help us get into those spaces.
That's great. Thank you. Anyone want to follow that up, or should I call on you?
No, that's great. April's got it down, and I, again, took her training. It's just good is being invested in finding those programs. And then, part of that is making sure they're vetted through either our tribal leaders too, because there is some organizations that use their status in a not so good, honest way too. So making sure they're vetted with the Indigenous communities is important. But everything April said.
And we're going to give the last word to you, Chairman Goggles.
Okay, thank you. In one word, I would say respect. That would be fostered through, just an example off the top of my head would be student athletics. They go everywhere within the state to play. And that's on that level, but it also can be on the adult level, like in the light of good sportsmanship. Because I think that plays a big part, because, people, they have a long memory. And if it's a good experience, where people are supporting, the kids, and then it shows, and then that shows a good example between adults, from the opposing teams and whoever's there. And that, I believe, could have a ripple effect. And it's just that understanding and the practice. It's not going to happen overnight, but but if you practice it in your everyday life, you being respectful to not just your own community, but to your neighbors as well. That's you'll eventually get reconditioned if you're not already conditioned.
Well, thank you all so much for being here tonight. This was really a fantastic conversation. I appreciate your time. I know you all are so busy and wear so many hats, and it really means a lot to me that you took time out of your schedules to be here for ESPC. And you heard it here, folks. A little bit of listening and a little bit of respect will get us a long way. So I will see you all in January. I hope this winter is safe and healthy for all, and see y'all soon. Have a great night.